I began my working life at 151 Marylebone Road in London, the offices of the advertising agency Abbott Mead Vickers BBDO, on the 25th of September 2003, 2 years and 2 weeks after the attacks on the World Trade Center. These two events are linked. You see, I grew up in the golden age of consumerism. My mum, for her part, grew up in the 50s and 60s, and a Britain still recovering from war and from rationing. She still remembers our family's first washing machine, a Hot Point Liberator, and remembers it deserving its name. I was 2 years old when the consumer super brands arrived, when Apple launched the Macintosh, when Virgin Atlantic broke open the skies and Nike sold their first Air Jordans, all in the same year. I was 15 when Tony Blair and New Labour heralded Cool Britannia, told us things could only get better, and were very comfortable with people getting filthy rich. I was 19 when the planes hit the World Trade Center, and Bush and Blair and Giuliani and others came out and said that what we could do, we the people, and what we should do was go shopping. And I was 21 when I stood at the doors of one of the world's leading advertising agencies, with stars in my eyes, thinking I'd found my place in the world and ready to make my contribution. And then it all began to go wrong. My first boss took me aside fairly early on and said to me, "This is your job, John. What you've got to remember is that the average consumer sees somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 commercial messages a day. Your job is to cut through that. You have to make yours the best." And he wanted me to focus on the first part of that, but for a while, on the second part, and for a while I did. But after a time, I began to ask myself a question. What are we doing to ourselves, to our relationships with one another, and to what we believe is possible when we tell ourselves we're consumers 3,000 odd times a day? I've been asking myself that question now for 15 years and more, and it's been a difficult journey, personally and emotionally, and also intellectually. I've gathered 3 master's degrees along the way and dug into every academic discipline, from moral philosophy to history to animal behavior to social psychology. And where I've come to at the end of all that is that I believe that the true impact of the pervasiveness and quantity of advertising in our lives, and many other factors, is not best measured actually, even by the footprint of the stuff being consumed, but by the brain print of the story we're telling ourselves, the story of the consumer. I've come to believe that this is a moral story, a story of how we should live our lives and how our society should work. That it's a story that's limiting us, that's telling us that we're not good enough to solve the problems of our world, and at worst is driving the behaviors that cause those problems. And that it's a story that right now is collapsing around us and threatens to take us down with it. But I've also come to believe that it's only a story. That if you look back, you can see that we've only lived with this story for the last few decades. And if you look forward, you can see that right now a new story, an alternative story is emerging, a deeply empowering one that we can all step into and be part of. Before the consumer, the story of society was the story of the subject. The right thing to do was to keep our heads down, get what we were given, do as we were told. The few with God-given power knew best, and so that was the path to the best outcome for society as a whole. This was the age of empire and aristocracy, of duty and conformity, and it fell apart and crumbled in on itself, most notably on the battlefields and in the trenches, as classes previously kept apart were viscerally confronted with their own basic shared humanity. Coming out of the 2 world wars and spreading across the world through the second half of the 20th century came the story of the consumer. Now we deserve better, and if we sought better, then the best society would result that way. Self-interest would add up to collective interest. The right thing to do now was to look out for yourself, to choose the best option for you from those that were offered, to produce whatever people would consume. This was the story that led to the Hot Point Liberator, to Virgin, to Apple and the rest. And from what came before, it was indeed a liberating shift. But the story of the consumer has flaws as deep and fundamental and fatal as the flaws of the subject. The field of social psychology gives us some of the best evidence of this. Studies suggest that even the introduction of the single word consumer into the framing of a survey questionnaire can prompt us to be less motivated to care about our neighbours, to be less motivated to get involved in local community and wider society, and even to care less about the environment. Now think about that single word and think about those 3,000 messages a day, and you start to see what I'm getting at when I talk about the brain print. What I've come to believe is that we're living in the midst of an epidemic of mental ill health and loneliness, and telling ourselves a story that we're narrowly defined individuals who should stand alone. That we're living in a time of pervasive inequality, and in a story that's telling us that the beginning of our moral duty is to look out for number one. And that we're living in the fundamental context of ecological breakdown, and telling ourselves a story that our agency is limited to choosing between the options that someone else offers. This is why the consumer story is collapsing, and this is why it's threatening to take us down with it. Now, if when the subject story collapsed, the consumer story was emerging, now the consumer story is collapsing, the citizen story is emerging. If as subjects, the right thing to do is to keep our heads down, as consumers to look out for number one, then as citizens, the right thing to do is to get involved. We're coming together in our communities, stepping into our power to shape the world around us for the better. Two factors, I believe, are coming together to drive and shape this citizen shift. The first is that at some level, we've always been consumers. This is a deeper human truth than any of what came before. There's a growing consensus across academic disciplines that collaboration, empathy, cooperation are as much drivers of the story of evolution as competition and status. And if you look back through history, from ancient Athens to the birth of the cooperative movement, a more participatory society has always been at least an undercurrent. But the factor that's meaning that now is the time when it could be more than an undercurrent, could become the story, is technology and the internet. And to explain this, I like to use the work of the philosopher Marshall McLuhan, a Canadian who liked to communicate his philosophy in aphorisms and sayings. The most famous, the medium is the message. And what he meant by that is the primary means of communication of a society and how that means of communication works, the medium, comes to shape everything about how the society works, the message. So in consumer society, the dominant medium is TV, television. With television, there's few producers and many consumers. It's a one-to-many society. The consumers can choose between the channels, but they can't shape and create the content. The potential, at least, of the internet, as it comes of age and becomes the dominant medium of society, is that it's a many-to-many society. That we can all play a role in shaping and creating the world we live in for the better. The potential, as I say, I'm very aware that this isn't exactly what it always looks like at the moment. But this is where McLuhan's second aphorism comes in. He said, first we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. As I see it, we created the internet as consumers. We created the ultimate marketplace. But in its intrinsic nature, the internet is more a forum than a marketplace, more a place for conversation than consumption, and it's beginning to shape us back. Now, I don't work in advertising anymore. I doubt that will surprise many of you. But I'm also not an academic. A few years ago, my old friend Irene Akeshis, a woman who defines the phrase, action speaks louder than words, dragged me out of academia, and together we founded a company, the new Citizenship Project. We're a consultancy of sorts. Our intervention point is organisations, and that's because we see organisations as the storytellers of society. We help those, we celebrate those who are already telling the story of the citizen, and we work to support those who want to. We often use this table in our work to help the organisations we're working with see where they are right now, see what modes they're working in, and to see what else might be possible. Subjects are dependent, consumers independent, citizens interdependent. As citizens, we treasure our individuality, but we know that life is only meaningful in interdependence. Subjects have stuff done to them, consumers have stuff done for them, citizens do stuff together, with and through organisations. Subjects obey and receive, consumers demand and choose, citizens create and participate. And the right role for organisations and leaders in a subject era is to command, in a consumer era to serve, and in a citizen era to facilitate and enable. We work with these ideas across sectors. In business, this citizen shift is partly about a move beyond the reductive consumer logic of profit maximisation and into a more purposeful mode. But those are really just the entry stakes as we see it. It's more about seeing people as more than consumers, seeing their agency as more than choice, seeing people as allies, participants, contributors in purposeful work in the world. One of our favourites is the company Brewdog, founded by two men and a dog 10 years ago or so. And we love their pioneering eco-breweries and commitment to the living wage, but more importantly, we love their 125,000 equity punks shareholders, their 6,000 person AGM, their open source recipes, and their new commitment to trading used beer cans for shares in the company. In our own work, we're perhaps most proud of our work with The Guardian, where we helped the editor, Kath Viner, define her mission for journalism in a time of crisis. Not just to sell papers or advertising clicks, and also not just to inform society, but to build hope, to equip people as active citizens with what they need to shape the world around them, rooted in an enduring core belief right back to the founding of The Guardian, that people long to understand the world they're in and create a better one. This is a strategy that opens up huge space for people to be much more active participants in shaping and contributing to Guardian journalism in many ways. And it's at the heart of their commitment to their donation-based model, which helped The Guardian break even in 2019. In one presentation, as we put it, people will pay for the Financial Times because they want to be the only ones that read it. We want people to pay for The Guardian because they want everyone to read it. In the public sector, this work, this citizen shift, is about moving beyond the reductive consumer politics, the retail politics, the consumer democracy, where our role is reduced to choosing between options that someone else has set every few years, and in between times seeing the organisations involved as providers of public services, and into a more participatory mode, where people provide ideas, energy and resources into shaping the world they live in. There are pioneering experiments in participatory democracy taking place all over the world, all the time right now. It's an extremely exciting space, from participatory budgeting to citizens' assemblies to consensus building, and we're proud to be playing our part in several of these. This story is also present in the third sector, in charities, museums, and so on, where the citizen shift is about moving beyond, again, that reductive logic which sees people as either on the one hand as donors to be competed for, and on the other as beneficiaries to be pitied and served. Instead, this story is about working together with people and understanding deep citizen truths that everyone wants to contribute something meaningful and needs to feel power over their own lives. We're very proud to have worked with Parkinson's UK for the last few years, helping that organisation transform and step into a space where people affected by Parkinson's are coming together to make their own lives better and transform the experience of that condition, while still providing support to those who need it. We live in dangerous and uncertain times. I believe we're in this space between the two stories. I think we know that the consumer story is collapsing around us. We can see it every day. And we know that it's still the dominant story. I think we know that the citizen story is emerging, but we also struggle to cling to it, struggle to make it real. It's not fully formed yet. And in our daily news that we read, it often seems more that the story of the subject is threatening to make a comeback than that we're ready to step into the story of the citizen. In that moment, I believe the work that we must do in the world starts with each and every one of us. And that's right at the core of the idea of the citizen, that this is something that we are going to build together. But it starts inside. It starts with work that's about challenging the dreams that we've shaped as we've grown up in the consumer era and surrounded by the consumer story. It starts with letting go of some of the aspirations and ideas of success we might have had. And that's really hard, trust me. But it also demands that we look out and start to act in the world, that we step forward into our agency in real terms. So what I would encourage you to do is, with these lenses, look out at the world, recognize when you see the consumer story, know its impact, and challenge it. The most pervasive is that you'll hear people say, but humans are lazy and selfish. They're not. People who are speaking from there are speaking from despair and from cynicism. Respond with hope. Look for hope. Look into your communities, your neighborhoods, your cities, the things you're interested in. You will find the story of the citizen emerging, I guarantee it. Take hope from that, and then get involved if you're not already, and get involved more if you are. You're not consumers, and you're not subjects. Now's the time to show it. Thank you.